Welcome. I think we're going to get started. So most of you know me, but if you don't, I'm Stephanie Petros. I'm the director of the Honors Program, and I teach in the English department here. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all to celebrate this really fantastic work that was done last spring in the Honors Program courses. So before I just give you a brief introduction of what you're about to hear, I want to extend, especially to our student presenters, congratulations on behalf of Drs. Byrne, Bongiovanni, and Achiroso, who are all normally at this event, but actually all had conflicts today. But they wanted me to extend their congratulations to you all. So, as many of you know, the work that you're about to hear is done in our Spring Honors Topics courses. These are one of the things that make the Honors Program really unique. These are 6-credit interdisciplinary courses that are team taught by faculty from 2 different disciplines on a range of topics based on faculty interest and availability. And so the work that you're going to hear in the 2 sessions today is from the courses that were offered in the spring of 2023. And the faculty have nominated the students whose work they thought would be best to present. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Dr. Leparati to come up and just give you a little bit of information about the sophomore course last year, which was called The Empire Strikes Back.
Hi everybody, I'm Matt Leparati, one of the professors who taught last semester's honors seminar, The Empire Strikes Back. I know the course has somewhat of a silly name, but the content is quite serious. Our students spend the first several weeks of the semester studying rather dense texts of post-colonial theory. This is a school of interpretation that makes sense of how literature is influenced by the history of colonialism. It deals with how writers from both colonized and colonizing countries depict things like race, culture, cultural interactions, and how literature can work at times as a tool for justifying colonialism, and at other times as a tool for resisting or questioning it. So after this intense opening to the semester, our students applied post-colonial theory to texts as diverse as 18th century slave narratives, British novels and short stories, poems and short stories by African writers, a contemporary novel set in the Philippines, and even a trippy, time-traveling epic poem set in the Caribbean. Our common theme running through the semester was the idea that categories like nations, races, cultures are all deeply influenced by the history of colonialism. To think of yourself as a member of a group, to conceive of a group's history that you're connected to, these are acts of imagination, no less than the writing of literature. In fact, all cultural productions can be examined in light of colonial history. So the semester's final project tried to test this theory that all cultural productions can be examined this way. Students had to take post-colonial theory and apply it to an animated Disney film. Now, you could look at an assignment like that and consider it kind of frivolous, so I would look for deep meaning in children's cartoons. And yet many of the literary texts that we read that semester, like Rudyard Kipling's short stories and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's novels, were aimed at children and young readers. Disney movies, like all other parts of culture, take place in a context produced by a colonizing culture and influenced by this history. Today we're going to hear presentations from 2 of our students. Enrico Bandal will present on Disney's Brother Bear and the Theories of Colonization. And Janelle Esquiliu will present a paper entitled Uncovering Neo-Colonialism in Disney: Sexualization, White Saviorism, and Violence in Atlantis, the Lost Empire. Congratulations to the students. I'm looking forward to hearing these papers again. Let's welcome our presenters.
Enrico Bonda is a junior nursing major with a minor in psychology. He's from Yonkers and Y and is part of the honors program here at the Mount. Like many other students, Enrico is glad to be given the opportunity to learn, grow, and share his ideas with the community. In his paper, Disney's Brother Bear and the Theories of Colonization, he will go into depth regarding how Disney's movie, Brother Bear, expresses some of the ideas of post-colonial theorists, as well as how representation of these ideas could impact how audiences view this particular movie.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Nancy said, my name is Enrico Pandal, and as you can tell by the title of my slideshow, I will be speaking about the movie Brother Bear, and I will connect it to the ideas of the post-colonial theorists that we discussed in our Empire Strikes Back course. Now, of course, I'm very nervous right now, so please forgive me if I stutter. Please bear with me. Thank you. So,
There you go.
actually, in case you haven't seen this movie before, this is what it looks like. Now, for this paper, I used ideas of basic theorists. On the left, we have Edward Said, and on the right, we have Wattian. So I thought I should start off by briefly introducing the ideas of these two theorists. Starting with Edward Said, I connected Brother Bear to his theory because in one of Said's articles regarding post-colonial theory, he brought attention to the idea of othering, which is what I mainly focused on when connecting his ideas to the movie. In short, othering is giving an individual or a certain population of individuals a misconstrued and usually derogatory identity in order to identify themselves in a good light. A general example of this would be saying something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm not like that." In his article, he claimed that most, if not all, of the colonizing powers used this idea of othering to make colonized people and their culture appear wild and unpredictable, while the colonized are sophisticated, clean, proper, etc. Moving on to Wattian. Wattian is a Kenyan author and academic who writes primarily in Igbo, even though he formerly wrote in English. His reason for giving up writing English is because in one of his literary works, he argued that writing in English was a way of submitting oneself to the dominant culture, while writing in native language is a way to express and keep one's own culture alive, making it seem like language itself could be a powerful force of expressing or suppressing one's culture. As such, the idea of language being a suppressive or expressive force could be extended to other aspects of culture, such as religion, traditions, etc. And this is what I focused on when finding the connection between his ideas and the movie. Now, again, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, I prepared a very short summary so that all of you could have an easier time following along and seeing the connections I made. The setting of the film is in post-Ice Age Alaska, and our main character named Kenai, who was voiced by American actor Joaquin Phoenix, is a member of an Inuit tribe. In a coming-of-age ceremony, he receives a totem, which is the bear of love. He becomes upset because he personally believes that bears are incapable of love, and that the only thing they do is steal from others. Coincidentally, Kenai encounters the bear stealing some of their food shortly after. A fight ensues, which results in the death of Kenai's eldest brother. Outraged, Kenai hunts down the bear and kills it. However, the ancient spirits deem the bear's death unnecessary, and as punishment, Kenai was turned into a bear himself, as you can see there. The plot of the movie mainly revolves around Kenai trying to transform back into a human with the help of another bear named Koda, while his other brother, Denaki, tries to hunt him down. Personally, I love this movie as a child, and I would still give it a solid 7 out of 10. But Edward Said and Wattian would see this movie differently, and here is why. Referring back to Said's idea of othering, I noticed that there are two different types of othering that were going on in this film. As mentioned earlier, Kenai was frustrated that he received the bear of love totem because he believed that they were incapable of love. He othered the bears by saying, and I quote from the movie, "They don't think, they don't feel." He is defined in various as these savage creatures that are incapable of having any sort of intelligence or emotions. At the same time, he is distinguishing himself and the rest of humanity from these animals by hinting that we are very much intelligent and capable of feeling emotions. And as a result, he is placing himself and the rest of humanity in general above and or superior to the natural world. What's interesting, however, is that, as I've stated before, Kenai is a member of an Inuit tribe, which according to history was a minority group. So having Kenai other the natural world brings up the idea that othering is not something that was exclusive to the colonizing powers at the time, but rather it was something that anyone was capable of doing in order to place themselves or a population above something or someone. The second type of othering in the film revolves around how the audience perceives Kenai, not only through his actions, but also as a character. Even though he technically is the one doing the othering, he is also being depicted by the filmmakers as being immature, inconsiderate, and ignorant towards nature. In other words, the filmmakers use Kenai's act of othering in order to allow the audience to other him. The audience, which could be considered the colonizers in this case, may very well perceive Kenai as immature and ignorant, and as a result, they are also fully capable of placing themselves above Kenai. This demonstrates the idea of Saying's definition of othering, which is, if you recall, a way to identify the self through giving a misconstrued identity to another. Moving on to Wakiango's theory, as mentioned earlier, I took his idea of language being a force of subjugation and of empowerment, and extended it to many different aspects of culture. Starting with language, though, Wakiango would most likely criticize how all the characters in the movie speak English rather than the traditional Inuit language of Inupiaq. Because of this, Wakiango would most likely see the Native Americans being depicted as submitting themselves to a dominant language. On the other hand, one could argue that the audience is only able to understand what's going on in the movie because it is in English. So rather than being a force of subjugation, the English language is sort of being used as a force of empowerment for Native Americans and the portrayal of their culture. This kind of plays into the complexity of Wakiango's argument because while using English language does let the audience understand what is going on in the film isn't being true to traditional Inuit culture that is depicting. I also think it's important to keep in mind what audience this movie is geared towards. Since this is a Disney movie, it's safe to say that the main audience would most likely consist of young children. If the movie wasn't in English and instead in Inupiaq, which is again the traditional language of Inuit tribes, then it would most likely be very hard for these young children to understand. Even adults will have trouble understanding what's going on. There is one scene that I found interesting though, and that scene is when Kenai was being transformed into a bear's punishment. Luckily I found a 3-minute clip of it, so I will play that quickly for all of you and then talk a lot about why I found this particular scene very interesting.
Businesses security helps you do more for nothing. Let's take example prompts and suggestions that unlock more.
Is everyone able to hear that? I don't know why, but to me, I personally really think that scene is really powerful, and I'll tell you why in a second. Now, some of you may have noticed this already, but in case you did not, the song that was playing in the background was not in English. In fact, it was in the traditional Indian language. There are no English subtitles or anything, and because of this, Watyanga would most likely praise a small, insignificant detail. Saeed, on the other hand, could argue that this is almost like the filmmakers are othering the Indian language itself. Because with how the scene was animated and the context that the audience is given, the song makes it all seem very mystical, mysterious, and even exotic to an extent. And the filmmakers would most likely not have been able to achieve the same feeling if the song was in English instead of in Indian. The song was not the only thing that the filmmakers depicted accurately, however. Referring back to my extension of Watyanga's idea regarding the accurate expression of one's culture, the filmmakers did a fairly good job at accurately depicting Inuit religion and beliefs. For example, the coming of age ceremony where Kenai received his toga was actually a common practice among Native American tribes, according to the sources I've used. The Inuit tribes specifically practice shamanism, which I quote from my source is embedded in the framework of cosmological beliefs and practices. Not only human beings, but also animals are sentient beings that have to be respected. Rules of respect also pertain to places, objects, and their non-human owners. The deceased watch over their descendants and namesake. Now, I personally found this very interesting, how most of the ideas of shamanism actually parallel what was going on in the movie. Kenai disrespected animals and treated them as non-sentient beings. As a result, he was punished by the ancestral spirits, and throughout his journey, we see his late brother watching him over in the form of an eagle. Even the fact that there is a shaman in the movie who was capable of associating with ancestral spirits is a fairly accurate depiction of Inuit culture. And so, to conclude, I would like to re-summarize everything that I've said in hopes of elaborating the connection between Brother Bear and the ideas of these two post-colonial theorists. Going back to Edward Said, he and his idea of othering as a way to identify the self is present in not only Kenai's actions, but also how the audience views Kenai himself as a character. One might say that the filmmakers simply depict Kenai as immature to help establish the conflict in the plot. However, with Said's argument in mind, one might argue whether or not there's a possibility that the filmmakers are unintentionally othering Native Americans and their culture, as well as their connection to nature. Watyanga's ideas elaborate on the idea of culture and allow us to determine which aspects of the filmmaker's depictions of Native American culture are accurate and which are not, as well as why there may have been some changes to appeal to a certain audience. Both of these theories reshape our understanding of the movie, as well as our perspective regarding the portrayal of Kenai, Native Americans, and their culture. And that is all for my presentation. I want to thank you all for listening, and I hope that sharing this information with all of you has been interesting and a little bit informative at least.
Thank you so much. So we're going to save questions to the end of the panel. So if we'll get Janelle's presentation up.
Today I'll be presenting Janelle SVU. She will be presenting her essay titled Uncovering Neocolonialism in Disney, Sexualization, White Saviorism, and Violence in Atlantis, The Lost Empire. Janelle SVU is a junior nursing major with a minor in history. She's from Brewster, New York, and is currently PRO for Student Nurses Association, secretary for Animated Video Club, and co-editor for The Underground. A general body member of and works as one of the honors coordinators for the honors program. With Disney's animated films being popular among children and adults, Janelle feels honored to share her research on neocolonialism in Disney. Uncovering neocolonialism in Disney's sexualization, white saviorism, and violence in Atlantis, The Lost Empire, dissects sexualization of female heroines and the domination of violent white saviorism. She would like to express her gratitude to her family, friends, and professors for their undying encouragement and for providing this space for her to share her interests. Please welcome Janelle.
So good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Honors for this wonderful opportunity and for Drs. Laparati and Hoffler for nominating my research. This is my second time presenting at the symposium and I'm happy to be here again. Just a brief side note before I start, my research encompassed themes of sexualization, white saviorism, and violence in Atlantis, but I'll be focusing more on the sexualization and white saviorism aspect of the film, and I'll explain more why later. So, as we all know, the Walt Disney Company is one of the largest and most successful conglomerates around the world. I've been enjoying its TV shows, animated films, and live-action films ever since I was a kid. With praise from film critics and general audiences, Disney provides adults and children alike with wholesome media filled with the bravest heroes, the evilest villains, and the most warm-hearted lessons. Disney's guise of producing apolitical entertainment escapes the harsh judgment of society, in which parents are concerned with exposing their children to popular media. Despite its popularity, Disney's animated films involve racist and sexist underpinnings that several audience members fail to recognize or willingly ignore. So before I continue my presentation, I would like to define neocolonialism. Neocolonialism is the continuity of the global political system in which colonialism continues to exist in new, different, and perhaps more modern ways in a decolonized world. For example, we can refer to the development of tourism in the Caribbean as neocolonialism due to an economic imbalance between the West and natives in poorer areas that are forced to live in the tourism sector. With the concepts of neocolonialism in mind, the discourse extends to Disney's 2001 film, Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Atlantis contains the same narrative devices and stereotypes of women of color whose community needs rescuing, white male saviorism, and the violent male colonizer. For this reason, neocolonialism becomes deeply ingrained in kids and adults alike, as Disney continues to construct their own narratives on race and gender. Through the perspectives of post-colonial theorists Emma McClintock and Franz Fanon, the adventurous expedition and exploration of Atlantis fade, revealing a story that embraces the sexualization of female heroines and domination of violent white saviorism. Atlantis begins by introducing a young linguist and cartography expert from Washington, D.C., Milo Thatch. He seeks to recover the lost empire of Atlantis, and he is passionate about Atlantis and Atlantean culture. He devotes his entire life and career into finding Atlantis. He believes that discovering the legendary civilization is an exciting opportunity for cultural exchange, a mindset that many neocolonialists possess. With the help of an expedition team led by Commander Warwick, Milo and the team successfully locate Atlantis and encounter Kita. The film emphasizes the sexuality and exoticness of the female heroine of color, Kita. The film reduces Kira to the narrative of a body, representing an amalgamation of different races, consumed by the violent white colonizer and white savior. The film constantly highlights Kita's tan skin, full bust, slim waist, and athletic physique. She wears a blue bra top and a short blue skirt, coded as traditional of her group. Kita's first experience in the film is a close-up of her doe eyes, her full pouty lips, and her long white hair. The film maintains shots of Kita's face and body from several angles. While Kita's personality is dominant and she is respected as one of the leaders of Atlantis, Milo and Mole, a mineralogist and excavations expert of the expedition, gawk at Kita without shame. So I'm just going to play a few clips showing that.
With Cape Insurance is here. With the journey for Steve.
Luego los libros de Esselin y de su Richard.
forth in different languages because the citizens of Atlantis, they know like a bunch of different languages, and the person that he had just punched said something like obscene in French after like finding out that she could speak French.
She did.
You do swim, do you not?
Oh, I swim pretty well. Pretty good, pretty good. Good, swim good, pretty good. I swim pretty good.
Good. It is a fair distance to where we're going.
Did you know in Atlantis, the Lost Empire, Kida is a princess, and according to Milo, she's about 8,005.
Anyways. Okay. So while those scenes are supposed to be comedic, it normalizes men's objectification of women's bodies and disproportionately impacts women of color. The sexualization of Kida's body stems from the post-colonial theory of white men oppressing the feminine lands of colonized people. In an excerpt from Imperial Leather, Anne McClintock asserts that the imperial scene of discovery is an active and sexual journey into the female virgin interior that's passively awaiting the thrusting male insemination of history, language, and reason. McClintock defines colonization as a masculine trait in which the male colonizers engage in megalomania to claim colonized people's lands as their own. To the expedition team, Kida is a prized resource of the Atlantean civilization. The hypersexualization of Kida acts as a justification for women of color in their communities to simply be passive objects for white male colonizers. At one point in the film, it's revealed that glowing blue crystals on the Atlantean's necklace contain supernatural properties. Kida is actually a manifestation of the crystal's energy in a human form. The realization that crystal and Kida are treasures invokes an aggressive colonist attitude towards claiming or stealing a precious native resource. McClintock comments on this mentality and argues that the eroticizing of virgin space also affects a community of their own. Also affects territorial appropriation, for if the land is virgin, colonized peoples cannot claim aboriginal territorial rights. Apart from the crystal itself, Kida is a land that Milo, Commander Work, and the rest of the team desire to discover, enter, and own. Not only do the characters in Atlantis itself sexualize Kida, but so do the filmmakers and audience as well. Artists and animators that worked in the film designed Kida as someone who is feminine in her clothing, has luscious hair and lips, has an athletic build, skinny waist, tall toned arms, and legs. Disney has followed a pattern of hypersexualizing women of color, such as Pocahontas, Esmeralda, and Princess Jasmine. Randy Haycock, one of the supervising animators, even stated that production designer Mike Mignola was apologetic about his inability to draw pretty girls. The main audience for Disney films are young girls who fantasize about being the main female leads or princesses. From an early age, these young girls are conditioned to survey and internalize the male gaze, giving control to the male spectator. Both white males, the film illustrates Milo and Commander Work as Westerners who exploit native lands in the pursuit of good intentions. The Atlantean people are unaware of the expedition, and upon the team's arrival, the Atlanteans are skeptical of the Americans, but they later warm up to Milo's knowledge of Atlantis. Ultimately, the film aims to position neocolonialism as a crucial element in uplifting native communities. Matthew Huey, author of the White Savior film, expands on how these heroes in White Savior films are positioned as unprejudiced. If these heroes are blatantly racist or sexist, the film defends it as a temporary trait due to their association with the villain, in this case, Commander Work. Atlantis portrays Milo as an intelligent scholar with multiple degrees in academic interests. His obsession with Atlantis is central to his personality and the white saviorism discourse. Milo comes off as a Greek or a nerd in a modern parlance, until the team finds his knowledge as invaluable when encountering the living people in Atlantis. By the audience, Milo is seen as a valiant, altruistic, and compassionate white hero towards the state of a marginalized community. But if you really look into his character, Milo ignores his privilege in comparison to the Atlanteans and disregards how advanced the Atlanteans already are without his aid. The film normalizes the white savior concept to acquit the white community of their wrongdoings, sexist and racist, forming territorial control, and erases the ongoing consequences of their injustices. The film even manages to tug the heartstrings of the viewers. Milo's interracial relationship with Kida contributes to love at first sight or happily ever after trope that audiences indulge in. The film promotes the white savior narrative even more by including a love story between the new colonial savior and the woman of color. This adds to the romanticization and probably glorification as well of white dominance concealed as a cultural exchange. Opposing Milo's personality, Commander Rourke is a greedy and manipulative mercenary at the climax. And at the climax of the film, his character switches from someone who could be trusting to that. He mirrors the economic opportunities that colonizers relied on. Although the comparison is extreme, Commander Rourke is akin to real-life explorers Amerigo Vespucci and Christopher Columbus. Lower secondary education encourages and praises Vespucci and Columbus for discovering the New World and opening it up to trade, while simultaneously erasing the atrocities that they committed. Because of how positively the film illustrates Milo, the audience is subject to defend Milo's position in the film, even if the expedition team was a reason for all the turmoil and chaos that later takes place. The popularity of white savior films sparked interest in non-white and non-white audiences as it showcases the normalization of new colonial acts across society. Often referred to as the white man's burden, colonizers undergo the moral and intellectual labor to save people of color. This pinnacle of whiteness inserts itself in the film as only a white person's duty to recognize injustice and stop it. Author Celeste Roy of Images of Animated Others contends that Disney films encapsulating those themes and exposing the youth to them will indoctrinate further generations with the ideas of neocolonialism. Considering that Atlantis is based on a fictional world with a fictional civilization, the effects may not be as harmful compared to the likes of Lilo and Stitch, Pocahontas, and Mulan. However, as false as it is in Atlantis, Disney continues acting as teachers and cultural creators, separating the dominant white colonizer from what they believe are the inferior colonized peoples of color. If Atlantis adapts the same formula, supporting neocolonialism as other Disney animated films, could there be a defining factor that separates it from other films? Given how the film is so adamant about the neo-colonial project of interracial tolerance, as represented by interactions between Milo, Commander Rourke, and the Atlanteans, Atlantis also endorses themes of violence that accompany colonialism and anti-colonialism. Violence in Atlantis mixes facilitating violence to resist white colonial domination and facilitating violence to occupy power within the colonized masses. Frantz Fanon defines violence by two different conditions: violence for the West and violence for colonized peoples. Fanon views Europe's use of violence as intense and cynic, whereas he deems violence for the colonized as unifying and liberating. But during my preparation for this presentation and going over my paper, Fanon's analysis does not actually align with the Atlanteans particularly well. Fanon did not mention or acknowledge the gendered implications of his work. When compared with the works of McClintock, applying Fanon's theories on violence to Atlantis reveals a level of male anxiety and paranoia. Fanon, however, does not communicate his thinking in a complex gendered way. In a general sense, Fanon points out how colonial rule consists of bringing their whole weight to hear violently upon obscene narcissism, and of bringing the problem of mankind to an infinite higher plane. The obscene narcissism Fanon suggests indicates a level of insecurity where the colonizer constructs an other to which the self is superior. The other or self does not have to be the male colonizer or the colonized female. Fanon also insists that colonies can only gain their independence through force and asserting dominance. Fanon believes that violence is unifying and allows colonized people to get rid of their colonized mindset. The Atlanteans' armed resistance operates less on Fanon's principles and nurtures the European spirit. Though there armed resistance against Commander Work, there exists a complex proposal that their violence, albeit not aligning with Fanon's views completely, denies the force of subjugation and amplifies their people. Unlike Commander Work, the Atlanteans do not have guns, planes, and explosives to rely on. Instead, the lands ride on mechanical fishes operated by the blue crystals. These vehicles are advanced in technology compared to that of the Americans. The fishes are durable, move fast, and shoot powerful lasers. Although the Atlanteans were unable to figure out why the mechanical fishes were unresponsive in the beginning of the film, the technology is fundamentally theirs. Therefore, the Atlanteans are innovative and are paving the way for restoring their self-respect. The colonized masses triumph by agreeing to a national destiny, fighting against underdevelopment, and then by creating the whole man. The Atlanteans achieve all three of these goals, irrespective of Milo's cooperation. The Atlanteans form a resistance that is just as effective without censoring the entirety of Western thought. Atlantis unpacks purposeful ideologies on race against a backdrop of impartial tales of heroes, intercultural relationships, and admirable efforts to triumph over adversity. Disney's intricate and grandiose fantasy worlds leave everyone at awe. The casual view or proper critique on the pervasive and stubborn neo-colonialism entrenched in society, generations of children will continue to digest harmful mindset. Disney's reimagination of colonial history will flourish without acknowledging its toxicity and by blinding the public from the stereotypes and the nature of their films, ultimately indoctrinating the public consciousness in the non-Western and Western world. Thank you.
So I'd like to invite both Enrico and Janelle to come up and Dr. Babrati. We have some time to take some questions from these two fabulous speakers.
Thank you guys for great papers. We're going to open up to questions. Questions from our presenters? Yeah.
Question for Enrico. What year did Brother Bear come out?
I forgot what year exactly, but I believe it was somewhere in the early 2000s, late 1990s. So sometime before I was born, basically.
That's also how I date things. So you said that Joaquin Phoenix was the voice of the lead character. I guess I'm assuming people have complained about that in the meantime. Since he's white, right?
Well, I did some research. I didn't exactly come up with any news or controversies against him. So I guess this isn't an issue that many people have realized or paid any attention to. But yeah, the main thing is he is an American actor and they got him to portray an Indian person.
Yeah. Which I think is pretty common because of box office receipts. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
What steps did you guys take to build your research and presentation?
I guess I'll answer first. So the way the way we choose the topic, they basically gave us like a list of like films. You guys like sign up for it, so it's like first come, first serve. For me, whenever I'm doing research, I try to communicate with like my professors on what exactly, like what I want like the idea to be. And they actually made us, Dr. Leverati and Dr. Ogler, they made us write like a draft or like write down points of like what we want in our papers, and then from there we just build upon it. So it's just a lot of like, I guess like collaboration between like the professors, or at least a lot of looking through other people's papers. That actually also helps. For Atlantis, I had a really hard time because it's kind of like one of the low-key Disney movies, so I had to look into other people's like, papers, like see what they wrote about the film, and then look at it.
Yeah, I pretty much have nothing else to add, other than signing up for the movies. The first step to actually creating the paper was to watch the movie. And then after that, I forgot what exactly I did. I believe I reviewed the theories of the post-colonial theorists and tried to see which one would fit best with my movie. after that, I looked up some articles, some scholarly articles, against not Wikipedia, and I basically took what they said, tried to piece it together, and yeah.
This question is for Janelle. Do you think these themes are also prominent in other forms of children media, like besides Disney, like Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network or anything else?
Oh, definitely. I think just like cartoons in general or like animated films. I think, like I said, there's a bunch of like themes of like hypersexualization or like colonialism. I know especially in like old movies. I mean, right now I can only think of like Disney, but there's definitely like if you really look into like the older animated films, you can tell that they were inspired by some sort of like colonial past that was happening. The Jungle Book was Disney. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, not to bring like the Disney thing again, but we watched a clip of the Jungle Book, and I think what was that? The thing with like the not like a cat, but it was like an animal. Was it a monkey? No, it wasn't a monkey. It was from like the Jungle Book, but I forgot what it was. Yeah, was that Disney? Or was that?
Yeah, no, so,
I don't know, but there's this thing called
it's Kevin, yeah.
yeah.
It's a short story about later.
Yeah, so he's that was supposed to be for like children, but with like our knowledge on like post-colonial theory, whatever, it had to do a lot with Britain's occupation in India. So like if you have like the history and everything, like you can really tell that this is like what they're actually talking about, even if it's like intentional or unintentional. Just
For both of you, do you think that there will ever be a point in time when Disney or other franchises will actually portray like accurate depictions of history and like more like I don't know. That's the end of my question. I really that's it.
Well, I can't say for sure, but I think it's also important to take into consideration the audience that Disney's going and DreamWorks. Well, Disney and DreamWorks, they're going for mostly a young child audience. So I don't think they would focus mainly on accurately depicting history and different cultures just because it might be too much for children to understand. Take Pocahontas, for example. Pocahontas was a real person in history, and also the European colonization, and yet they still had to change it because realistically it was not that romanticized.
For me, I feel like it's a lot about money. So even if, let's say, like, their story was, like, historically accurate, maybe, like, the actors, like, the actresses that they hired aren't necessarily, like, from, I guess, like, that ethnic group or from, like, that historical background. I know it's, like, controversial, but I know, like, when they did, like, the live action of Mulan, I think the actress was, like, involved with, at that time, like, the police brutality, like, or whatever. And a lot of people are, like, upset about that, because it's like, oh, like, if you're playing a female heroine, that's supposed to be, like, against all of this, and, like, having, like, this ideal mindset of, like, whatever it was, then, you know? So, I think it really is, like, a lot about money. So I think it's kind of hard to really get to that point, but it's definitely possible. And I'm sure, like, there are films out there that accurately portray what you're talking about, so.
This is kind of a riff on that question, but can you think of any like children's, like I'm thinking of, did you see Elemental? You guys see Elemental, the new Pixar movie recently? Anyways, but I'm thinking of like maybe the best children's media is the one that doesn't try to do anything realistic, right? Like, let's just have fire people and water people, and you can still talk about like segregation and things like that, but there's no connection to reality. I don't know if you have any thoughts about other like children's entertainment that maybe is more responsible than.
Yeah, I can think. What's that movie with like the emotions?
Oh,
yeah, I can think of like there doesn't have to be, like you said, there doesn't have to be like a connection to like whatever the past, or they don't have to like rip off of that. It could just be something like completely new, like completely different. I think that's like a question for like both the children and like adults, and like I guess like people my age who are like growing up from like that era of Disney or like other animated things.
I can't really think of any other movies that do the same thing. When I heard your question, For some reason, Puss in Boots came to my mind. I don't even know why. But I don't think, well, there are some movies that definitely don't have anything to do with colonization or anything like that. But it still doesn't change the fact that there are still mostly movies that do have these ideas and theories somewhere in them.
I grew up a long time ago, and when TV was just black and white, and my mother was very militant. I mean, she was Malcolm X in the 1950s. And so I grew up reading Langston Hughes and Richard Wright when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. Fast forward to today, has anyone seen the movie Prey? Right, because they haven't advertised it. Prey is a really good movie. It came out last year. P-R-E-Y. It's part of the Predator series. Yeah, I know, nobody, because it wasn't advertised. The protagonist, first of all, the whole movie is in Comanche. The entire movie.
I heard about that.
Right.
Yeah.
With English subtitles. The protagonist is a teenage girl who takes on the predator and wins. But the movie takes that Disney crap and flips it around. If you ever get the opportunity to see it, they wouldn't advertise it. I don't know why. And it's a really good movie. Even the dog speaks Comanche. That's how good the movie is. But going back to Disney, I don't know if you're going to talk about Fantasia. Have you seen Fantasia, the 1939 version? With the, well, I'm not going to get into it. Song of the South? No? With the crows? Dumbo? Those movies are just racist. Going back to black and white TV, it started with me with The Lone Ranger. And my mom says, what are you doing watching that? I said, you know, I like watching The Lone Ranger. It's cool, got a white horse and a white hat and white gloves and white boots. She said, what about Tonto? And I said, what about Tonto? Well, Tonto doesn't even call the Lone Ranger by his name. He calls everybody in the movie by the third person. He never says I. Also, the Lone Ranger sends Tonto into town every episode. Tonto goes to town to get information and gets the crap beat out of him. Why did the Lone Ranger go to town? Right? They call him a redskin as soon as he gets there. They put him in jail. He comes back all beat up with the information. Now, 50 years ago, that was, no, 70 years ago, that was acceptable. You could never get away with that now. But this is going on and on and on in movies and TV for as long as I can remember. Even as far as Lilo and Stitch, the characters in that, what's the one with the Asian girl who's the...
Mulan?
Yeah, Mulan, all of those movies. And Disney won't stop. And they're going to keep doing it until, look at The Little Mermaid. The big protest, the reason the movie wasn't a success is because some people said, how could you have an African-American mermaid? Now that's a fictional character. Just like, I see her face, I don't know what her name is. She said, how could you have a black Santa Claus? And if you folks don't protest this by not going to the movies and writing letters to Disney and Disney Studios, they're just going to keep making these movies. And one thing I do like about Disney, which I hate, is they have no problems focusing on every single race and gender on the planet. Aladdin, right? Look at Tarzan. Tarzan's a white guy living in the middle of Africa who can speak to the animals, but the people who live there can't speak to the animals. And my mother said, turn that crap off.
The Prey movie, you know who made Prey? It's not Disney. The Predator, Prey?
Yes.
It's not Disney, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
Because that's an interesting example. Like a movie done entirely in Comanche. The idea, I saw a thing for it online. It was the Predator comes to Earth at a different time.
The 1730s.
The 1700s and fights the Comanche. I was kind of curious when you brought that up. What do you guys think a theorist like Latiano would make of a movie like that, done entirely in Comanche with English subtitles? And is that like a response to this kind of Disneyfication of culture? Yeah. I don't know why I did that, so it's.
And lastly, look at science fiction. Who was the first black person in outer space? Right, Lieutenant Uhura in 1965.
I'm old too, so that's why I knew that.
He was a hottie too.
Thanks, Chuck. Thank you. Other questions for, did you have a response to that, or?
Sorry. I feel like we talked about this before with like dog eaters and how Hagedorn was using italics to communicate like about it. I forgot what exactly we said about that. I was like trying to think about like all the Elvis theory, but I think maybe he would like it a bit because at least since the entire he would like it because like if the film was spoken in the native language and there were just the English subtitles, then it would be I guess like us or like people who don't know the native language sort of like adapting or like adjusting for the native language. So I think
Other questions? Comments? Oh, one more.
This is for both of you guys. So do you think that the time period which these movies came out, like allowed like the kind of like the perpetration of these stereotypes to be allowed and to not have as much backlash and should actually be like encouraged in the media because they could pass off as being a way to appeal to the children audience and to the younger audience?
Well, it's hard to say because I wasn't around when the movie was made, but I wouldn't say they encouraged it actively. I would just say like it was just normal for that time period. So it just kind of happened while they were trying to create the plot of the movie.
I mean, even now, I think back then, because like people's mindset weren't like that open. Everyone was like really, really racist. A lot of people that worked on Disney back then were majority white. Even the fictional characters that were supposed to be of an ethnic race, they were white. So I think people can argue that it wasn't intentional, but I think it was intentional because they just don't have like the knowledge or like the background of like, oh, like what I'm doing is not what I'm supposed to be doing. That makes sense.
Any questions?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this. It's interesting to try to think about how to present history to kids because, I mean, like in the movie, the Atlantis movie, where you have, it wouldn't be accurate to present like white colonizers coming in and treating everyone respectfully. It wouldn't be accurate history. So like, is it possible to present white colonizers being white colonizers and like over-sexualizing the women, the native women? But then also critique that. So like, obviously you can do that in movies for adults, where you can portray people doing things they shouldn't be doing, but then filmmakers directing your attention to the fact that they shouldn't be doing that. The question then is whether you can do that in a kid's movie. I don't know the answer to that, but I bet it would be possible with like an imaginative director. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
Or is depicting it always participating?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Do you know the movie Home from DreamWorks? Okay, so basically what happens in Home is that there's this alien species, right? And basically they come down to Earth and start colonizing the people, like directly. They're not even trying to hide it. And throughout the whole movie, our main character, who is also part of these aliens, he's accompanied by a human, and he's kind of, throughout the whole movie, he's belittling her, and at the same time, he's also fighting back against his words. So I guess you could say that there is colonization in this movie, but at the same time, one of our main protagonists is fighting back against it directly. So I think that movie did a pretty good job depicting history, even though it's not relatively within Earth's boundaries.
Right. Yeah, the fact that it's not exactly historical isn't like that, because it's power dynamics that are important. Yeah, that's cool.
Oh, I was gonna reference home as well. Like you said, I don't really have an answer either. Like I really have to think about that. But it's definitely possible. Like you said, like really imaginative, like director. I mean, if there are movies that are able to like communicate like certain lessons or morals to like children, then I'm sure it'll be possible to communicate these power dynamics to kids. It just might not be to like the same degree as it is with like adults, because like I feel like there's just like things we have to communicate to children when they're like older. Like I don't like I guess like I wouldn't want to like put like everything onto them, but I guess it's like a step.
There is a scope and sequence for social studies, right, for elementary school. So they do go over Native Americans and you know, some of these topics from a historical perspective. I remember with my fourth grade we had Native Americans, but we also discussed the emperor's last new group, like, so we critique that after studying the facts. And so there is a way of going around it. I mean, it is part of the scope and sequence. You just have to find the right resources, right?
I was going to say the students here have to grow up to become filmmakers. And some of you creative people. We're going to
Yeah, we should just
all right. Well then, let's give
take like 2 minutes. Feel free to get up and get some refreshments and get things ready for our second presenter. Oh, okay. Right, okay. The second session is from our freshman honors class from the spring, and to introduce that, I'm going to ask Dr. Nalis and Dr. Archibald to come up.
Okay. So here we have the crowd. So the class began with a kind of a perceived problem. The title of the class is "What is Evidence?" And a perceived problem came out of all the things that we hear on the news. Is the vaccine for COVID giving people illness? Is autism related to measles vaccines? The former president's facing 91 different charges and 4 indictments in different states. And so the question is, well, all of these different problems come down to the question, what is evidence? But evidence is in all different fields, doesn't mean the same thing in every field. And so what Professor Archibald and I had to do is basically MC a class. We invited guests in every week to talk about evidence in a different field because they were experts and we're not. So we had, they're experts in our field, but not in all the fields, nobody is. And so we had, for instance, a journalist from the New York Times and the New Yorker come in to talk about what is evidence in journalism. We had an obstetrician, a specialist in maternal fetal medicine, come in to talk about evidence in like health in pregnant women in Ghana, where she's doing her research. We had colleagues from the Mount, Dr. Haney from the biology department, not a climate change scientist himself, but he presented some of this question about what is the evidence of climate change. From philosophy, our colleague, Professor Burmeister, talked about evidence in philosophy and specifically in Descartes. We had 2 artists come in and did really interesting presentations on evidence kind of in appearance, I guess I would call it. One photographer, Professor Miller, and a visual artist, Dr. Ray Willis. So I'm not going to tell you what we came up with. I'm going to let our presenters do that in their own way. But I will say that it's like not a one-word answer, right? There's no kind of simple sentence in our class to the question of what is evidence. And it's not a list either. We didn't end up sort of saying, evidence in journalism is this, and evidence of climate change is this, and evidence philosophy is the following. We came up with a way of understanding this all that the students respond to themselves. And just the last thing on the way the course worked, we didn't present what we thought up front. We had a kind of dizzying experience for the students, they'll tell you about this, which was we had a different guest every week, sometimes 2 a week, come in to talk about evidence in their field. And after 3 or 4 weeks, one of our more outspoken students was like, what is evidence? we weren't offering up a simple answer. We were asking the students to take what different experts said and try to come up with an answer themselves or ourselves. And so you'll see the final project. We all looked at one object, which is this taxidermy crow, from a different perspective. And that's what they're going to present. What I meant?
The only thing that I will add is that, I think that covers it for the most part, but what I will add is the papers that were written in response to the crow from the different perspectives on what is evidence were all outstanding papers. They were absolutely excellent. And so it's not as if we selected only the best ones. They all could have, anyone who was in the class could have come and given a talk here. They were all very, very interesting. We've selected 3 of them that are quite different. One is from a journalistic perspective, another one is from legal, journalistic, and what's the other one? Economic. So these are 3 perspectives. We could have chosen an aesthetic perspective. We could have chosen one from the social sciences. We could have done a literary analysis, some kind of English crit of the crow, which students did, and I have to say, again, they were outstanding. They were absolutely fabulous. We'll let them speak for themselves.
Great. Thank you.
Francesca De La Rosa is a sophomore in the honors program at Bronx, New York. She is very honored to have been given the opportunity today to act as one of the representatives for the What is Evidence course. Her presentation, The Crow from a Journalistic Perspective, will examine an important aspect of the class, which is how methodology can inform your approach to accessing evidence, specifically from a journalistic lens. Please welcome her to the stage. Hello everyone, I'll be showing you my presentation on the crow from a journalistic perspective. But before I get into what I did, I wanted to provide a quick overview of the course. To summarize, we took a look at different kinds of evidence, like the professor said, from articles, photographs, even audio from podcasts, across the different disciplines to recognize the mechanisms at play behind them in order to properly evaluate them accurately. And to paint a clear picture, I want to provide an example of a moment in the class where things started to make sense to me. So one moment was when we read an article called Morelli, Freud, and Sherlock Holmes by Carlo Ginzburg. And part of the passage discussed an art critic called Morelli, who was able to tell apart paintings that were either done by an imposter or the original artist by looking at the ears, the fingers, and the toes of the painting. Some of the things that you and I may not have thought too much about, and especially an imposter wouldn't have thought too much about either, since they were mostly focusing on replicating the big statement piece. And Morelli was able to use looking at the minor details as sort of methodology. Because how the copycat would actually be inclined to paint those features would be completely different to how the original artist would, since it would be based on their subconscious expertise. In this idea of looking at the minor details, a significant detail to reveal the bigger picture was basically a methodology, at least the closest we can get to methodology in the humanities discipline. And this reading was able to help me understand some of the stuff that we would be doing over the course of the semester over and over again. which I'll elaborate further in my approach from a journalistic perspective. So like we said before, for our final presentation, we were to tackle the crow in like numerous of ways, whether the taxonomy itself or crows in general. I decided for the case of journalism, I would tackle some sort of event involving crows in general, since in news articles there's always some sort of story and event that is the main focus of the article. And then I would proceed to demonstrate how I would report on the crow as if I were a journalist on the scene. So an event that caught my attention was this big headline that said, "Crows took over downtown Portland, then they left. What happened?" It was written by a writer called April Elrich, who describes what she calls an unusual absence of crows in downtown Portland around mid-March of 2022. So now I have my story, how I saw my debut as a journalist for this event with the journalistic method. As you may have guessed, journalism is a form of gathering evidence in order to inform an audience, whether it be through a newspaper stand or online blog. But both ways are still governed by certain criteria and rules. To have one of your articles published isn't just a click of a button. You usually have to go through some institution like a public agency in order for it to be spread for mainstream consumption. And as a journalist, you have to follow their standards and practices in order how they expect you to cover a news story and properly conduct yourself in the field. And in addition, your article will have to go through a team of editors for the purpose of fact-checking your sources or even remove areas that might lead to bias takes. And in addition, we learned from this discussion with one of our guest speakers, a journalist from the New Yorker, David Kirkpatrick, that there are some things that the journalists could do on their end in order to keep their work closer to being objective. They can develop several questions in order to narrow down their focus and make sure to pay special attention to all the sides in the story of whatever they're covering. So, for my journalistic debut, some of my questions were, what made Not Spotting These Birds so newsworthy? And to follow, what would have been the factors that would have contributed, what would have been factors that would have influenced their behavior in the city that could have caused them to disappear. So gathering evidence from experts. To find my answers, I took a look at some of the forces at play that are most involved with interacting with the crows, the most in this urban landscape. And as a journalist, I would have spoken to two organizations that came up a lot, Portland, Ottawa, and Avian Solutions. Portland, Ottawa is a wildlife refugee organization that's focused on the protection and conserving of favored wildlife, in this case the crows, while Avian Solutions was an organization of hired professionals that worked on dispersing the crows in the city to avoid massive buildup of fecal matter. And I believe that these two organizations would have been made good pools of sources for information in regards to this event, since that both sources would be quite familiar with the crow and their movements throughout the city and their behavior. And just like David Kirkpatrick had advised, he had reiterated in his discussion with us that the purpose of looking at both sides is to be fair to all parties involved in order to avoid bias and to remain objective. And I believe both of these organizations deliver good enough evidence, good enough information regarding the crows and how they would navigate the city landscape, but also have different interests on the matter, since a wildlife can focus on preserving and protecting your crows and habitation, while Avian Solutions does have a monetary gain as they are providing a service for the city. So then going back to my primary question, what made this story so newsworthy? Why did Not Spotting like a couple birds making headlines? So I found my answer for why the story was newsworthy from Portland, Ottawa. And the reason that is that the city has one of the biggest populations of crows. According to the article by the wildlife refugee, Portland, Ottawa records that their roost, which is basically like a nest where the crows sleep and eat in their stay safe. Has largely grown over time to the point that at its peak it can exceed 15,000 birds, which is pretty crazy. And due to the abundance of crows, calls for the services of these professionals from Deviant Solution to disperse the crows enough that the city is not overrun by fecal matter, which this process takes up to like several months. However, for this event, their services appear to not be necessary, as by mid-March, the scene was described by onlookers as not a crow in sight, and the loudest noise in the city was rush hour traffic and not the stadium of roars by thousands of crows. And then, now that I found the answer for my primary question, I'll look into my second one. What could have been the factors that influence their behavior habitation that could have caused for their sudden disappearance? And I felt that I gained a lot of insight from Deviant Solutions and their disbursement process. Since their process has a close interaction to crows, they're kind of controlling, influencing their movement throughout the city. So how these professionals work is that they release their trained crows to the city blocks, most carnivore crows, and intimidate them with their appearance in order to move them to different areas with open spaces, sort of away from residents and public property. In the quote, one of their representatives, Matteo Bunzini, they fly a few laps around the block or two, just enough to irritate crows, so they go somewhere else. The idea is to push them to screen spaces ideally. And then let's not get to ponder, were the hawks being too rough for crows? How much did this intimidation factor play into what was happening? And were they really being honest in how their process worked? Maybe I had, for the Ottawa to verify this procedure, that yes, it is a humane and recommendable approach to crows and interactions in the city and interactions with residents and public property. It is also recommended by the Humane Society of the United States and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Reserve to approach such conflicts involving crows in the general public. And to quote them, the hawks were used for the process. The hawks in the process have no direct contact with the crows. It's just mostly an intimidation factor. They simply do short flights in the vicinity of crows to shift them towards more acceptable areas within the area in order to stick with their family. And then furthermore, the crows have been cited as intelligent and easily trainable. So when they're relocating their roosts, basically their homes, to trees in the waterfront parks, there isn't much of a hindrance due to how very intelligent that they are. So then after gathering this information, they would come up with a part of explanation for the odd absence, as the article kind of left it open-ended for the audience to decide. And it's important to know, as previously cited, how intelligent and trainable the crows are, but also how sociable, judging by how crowded their roosts are, which demonstrates a sense of community in their behavior. The crows could have, due to their intelligence, could have noticed a pattern with how the hawks will disperse them during certain times of the year, and they were able to adapt to it by starting to depart early from their original locations in order to relocate to these open areas and make the process much easier. They essentially got the memo that they needed to be out of certain areas during certain time of months, since the disbursement process took several months, which gave them time and repetition to understand the pattern and be able to adapt to the problem. And then due to their communal nature, the crows were likely to leave in droves at estimated rates to stay united with their families and encourage them to head to areas that they're typically be relocated to away from public property and the rest of the residents. So what I know now is that through looking at methodology employed by either institutions or journalists themselves, I was able to get the new appreciation for the discipline and mechanisms in place to what we consume as information or news in order for them to be close to objectivity as possible. And I'm grateful for the course that helped me to develop these skills, to recognize these mechanisms on my own when I celebrate evidence whenever it's presented to me. And thank you.
Like with the last panel, we'll leave questions till the end. So we're just going to get.
The next presenter
presenter will be Abigail Farias, the craft from the economist's perspective. Abigail Farias is a sophomore psychology and English major with a minor in writing from Queens, New York. She's a member of SAMAHN and CMSV words. Abigail is excited to have the opportunity to present the Crow from an economist's perspective, which discusses evidence and methodology from a political, economic, and organizational standpoint. Please welcome Abigail Farias.
Hi everyone. So I will be presenting the Crow from an economist's perspective. But before we get into everything, we can talk about what exactly is evidence and what the class is about. So, what is evidence? Evidence, contrary to popular belief, is not a black and white concept. It's a nuanced idea stretched on the objective and subjective spectrum. Objectivity is defined as being rooted in a strictly followed methodology. To follow a methodology, the process is subject to as multiple points of view to remove as much bias as possible. On the other hand, subjectivity is based on personal perspective and opinion. Evidence, no matter its place or field, is the material that creates a narrative or story specific to its place in the subjective-objective spectrum. I will be taking a political, economic, and organizational perspective on evidence. In this case, it's actually a Crow. So, political, economic, and organizational evidence runs closer to objectivity than it does to subjectivity, dealing with receipts, numbers, and a method of determining reliability. From this perspective, the Crow has certain attributes assigned to it. Rather than analyzing the Crow for metaphorical meaning, I looked for the literal physical value of the Crow. As an economist or businessman would perceive the Crow as having a monetary value and as an item or product. Because the Crow can be sold in order to make a profit, it must be manufactured and then distributed. But the question is, why can the Crow be viewed this way? What criteria determines its value? Well, because the Crow is an item, it must be manufactured and constructed. The Crow consists of several pieces, each of which also have value. The Crow's taxidermy thus is made up of the remains of a dead animal. The flesh of the creature is removed and must be replaced in the base underneath it to give it a structure that imitates a real crow as close as possible. The Crow is sewn close and then mounted on wood, which is further placed on a rubber or silicone base, allowing it to stand properly. Taxidermy labor in itself has a value, depending on the animal. The labor cost would not only cover the cost of materials required to taxidermy an animal, but the time and effort needed for the process. Because the Crow is an item that has value, it can be sold for a profit. The Crow's value can fluctuate, thus the price is sold at must take into account other factors. If inflation increases, the Crow requires more money to be constructed and then must be sold for a higher price. Therefore, fewer people would be purchasing one. However, if inflation was lower, the cost of the Crow would also be lower, and there would be an increase in sales. Trends can also account for the cost of the product. Taxidermy Crows becoming the hottest new thing to feature in homes around the world would drive the price up. But knowledge of crows becoming an endangered species would probably lower sales. Thus, prices would either spike to account for the loss of profit or would drop to encourage more people to buy it. The Crow skater would also change the value of it as well. Famous artists and sculptors, such as Banksy, or popular actors or musicians like Jennifer Lawrence or Taylor Swift, having a hand in the Crow's production would ensure the value of it and ensure higher quality and reliability. However, more up-and-coming groups and companies would not have the same trust or following from the general public. Thus, the Crow might not be seen as valuable as it would have been if it were signed by someone like Andy Warhol or Pablo Picasso. A Crow of lower quality, i.e. one with loose stitching, a rotting wooden mount, or an unstable base beneath it, would be worth less money. The Crow itself wouldn't last as long as one of a higher caliber, one with properly sourced materials and quality labor, and thus the higher Crow would be worth more money. The Crow itself is made up of individual pieces and must go processed to be manufactured and sold. In this case, the process is taxidermy. This is going to be a little gruesome, I'm so sorry. But taxidermy begins with carefully skinning the animal and cleaning the skin. The excess parts that aren't used are removed, such as flesh or organs, and the base of mannequin is sculpted using materials like foam and clay.
Wires are inserted into the wings, tail, and legs to maintain structure, and then they can be inserted into the base. The bird is sewn up and eyes are fitted into the animal's head, and then the taxidermied animal is mounted on wood and then onto another rubber base for it to properly stand. Once the first crow base is created, the process can then be sped up and taxidermy crows can be constructed quickly, leading to a mass-producing factory manufacturing process, because this is clearly ethical. Because the crow is manufactured, it costs money to produce. Making money after manufacturing requires selling and making a profit. In order to sell on a wider scale, thus making more money, the crow must be sold to distributors. Determining a proper distributor is difficult and relies heavily on evidence. From our own business department, Professor Manzi discussed how the evidence used in this particular field consists of bank statements, accounts, transaction records, management accounts, payrolls, billing invoices, receipts, and inventory. Income statements, balance sheets, and attributes that explain the company's internal processes are also essential pieces of evidence. And all that will be listed up here. However, these pieces of information and evidence can be manipulated, which is why these statements are audited every year. Auditing is a methodology by which an entity's financial statements are verified to ensure that they're both accurate and fair. In requiring these statements, we are able to determine who a reliable distributor is. Having evidence allows us to trust our distributors and make sure we are trading fairly. Next step in this process is marketing. Even though we have distributors to sell the crow, we must be able to market it and make this purchase seem appealing. Because who wouldn't want a taxidermy crow? Without being able to reach customers, selling the crow and making a profit from it would be difficult. In order to make a profit, the amount of money earned from selling the product must be more than the cost of production. We must figure out how we will sell the crow. In determining our target audience, we have to come up with a marketing strategy. In determining our target audience, we ask ourselves, who's going to buy a product? Teenagers that are really into Edgar Allan Poe? Adults who are really into crows? What's that? Okay. We can introduce more products that will be used to accessorize the crow, such as this hat. And if you don't mind. Please stay on. There we go. That is a win for the day, because we thought it was all good fall. But we can introduce more products such as that. Other clothing items like scarves or props that customize the crow to the individual will convince more people to buy it. We can collaborate with other influencers who can use their wide fan bases to further sell the product while getting something in return, a taxidermy crow. In being promoted by an influencer, the product will reach a wider audience than if we tried to sell the product on our own. And lastly, we're going to use social media. Marketing strategies. Using the media to properly promote products will ensure profit from sales and contribute to a potential marketing strategy. This strategy also includes the usage of social media and the internet, allowing companies to keep up with the rising and falling social trends to see when it is the best time to sell. There we go. In an internet-driven world, In an internet-driven world, we can utilize social media, especially platforms like TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube. Platforms like these will allow us to engage with potential customers and receive feedback on products. Social media is also essential for making advertisements that are targeted to our audience, possibly even drawing customers from outside of it. In understanding the rising and falling social trends, we would know that when the best time to sell this crow would be. Crows would be infinitely more popular if they were featured in the media in a good light, such as during Halloween season when crows and seemingly other mystical things are in high demand for decoration. Who doesn't want that in their house? Or crows being featured in a popular TV show or movie, thus inspiring people to want to have one in their homes. But they would be less popular if they were portrayed in a negative light, such as if a news article came out saying that crows were endangered, or if crows became associated with an unpopular celebrity or political figure. Using the media also allows a company to create image or narratives, such as promoting the foundation story of a small taxidermy business and discussing with an audience why certain products were created. In conclusion, evidence is used to create a narrative which differs based on the field it's in. The fields lie the subjective-objective spectrum, each of which require evidence. A taxidermy crow is a piece of such evidence. In the political, economical, organizational perspective, the crow is an item with value that can be sold for a profit. Thus, it must be manufactured, then marketed, and distributed appropriately. Evidence in this field would be used to determine who proper distributors would be and what the best ways to market those products are. Thank you for listening.
Take my the last minute cancellation. So I'm going to introduce our final speaker, Victoria Gamara, who's going to be looking at the crow through a lawyer's lens. So Victoria is a sophomore psychology and Spanish major, double major, with a minor in education from Long Island, New York. She is the current vice president for Rekindle the Flame, captain of the women's soccer team, which, as you all know, made the conference finals on Saturday. Four members of the women's soccer team in the honors program. So I feel like there's justification in providing that. Campus ministry student leader and a student worker for athletics. She appreciates the opportunity to share her piece, The Crow Through a Lawyer's Lens, which focuses on the evidence-based approach from the justice standpoint.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As was said, my name is Victoria Gamara, and I'm here to grant some insight into the law-based approach of evidence for my final essay in the honors What is Evidence course from last semester. For a little overview of the class, it is largely assumed by many individuals that evidence and facts go hand in hand or are synonyms of one another. In the honors evidence class, students are taught to peel back the layers on what the definition of evidence truly is and how it is used. Evidence is simply the material of a narrative. However, different areas have different perspectives on what evidence is accepted. A spectrum exists of subjective and objective leading evidence depending on the field of study that one is focusing on. Evidence is needed in every field for a claim to be supported and valid. Whether the field is as subjective as art or as objective as science, a criteria of evidence exists. This criteria is upheld by methodology and institutions. During one class section, lawyer Josh Maximum spoke to the class about the approach lawyers take when gathering and analyzing evidence. According to Cornell Law School, the present-day legal system is a procedure or process for interpreting and enforcing the law. The task of the lawyer is to collect and utilize legally accepted evidence to express their narrative. The evidence can be either direct evidence or circumstantial evidence. Direct evidence is a direct proof of facts, such as a first-hand account from a witness. Circumstantial evidence is evidence that does not directly connect a defendant to a crime, but rather implies a connection exists. Lawyers on either the defense or the prosecution side use different pieces of evidence to construct an argument to ultimately persuade the jury and win their case. Law approaches evidence in an objective, focused methodology for the sake of fairly determining how to use and enforce the law. The federal rules of evidence is a method that lawyers use in determining what constitutes evidence that is acceptable in court. The methodology governing the law system and its evidence gets us as close to objectivity as possible. For the final paper and presentation in this class, Professor Nalix and Professor Archibald gave us the task of using our designated field of study to examine how a crow would be used as evidence. When presented with a taxidermy crow statue, a lawyer takes a unique approach. Law has the ability to take evidence directly, such as in the case with United States v. Vanessa Randall. In this case, 26-year-old Vanessa Randall from Montreal, Quebec, was arrested and charged with selling and smuggling wildlife skulls. As the owner of an antique shop called the Old Cabin Boutique, Vanessa had the paperwork to sell wildlife items legally. One day in 2019, however, she advertised a taxidermy crow, like the one here, through Facebook for $325, and not through her boutique in which she has the sales contract. the United States Fish and Wildlife Service saw this post and assigned a secret agent to investigate to see if there was illegal activity occurring. Soon after this post, Rundell posted 3 more advertisements for polar bear skulls at $700 or more. The secret agent purchased all 3 of these items to see how Vanessa would ship them over international borders. In their exchange, Rundell unknowingly admitted to illegally shipping the wildlife items from Canada to the US, as she labeled them as gifts rather than sales. Following this confession, Vanessa was arrested in May 2021 while trying to cross the border from Vermont to Canada to escape with more wildlife items. She was charged with illegally importing merchandise and violating the Lacey Act, which combats to trafficking of illegally imported wildlife, fish, or plants. The mounted crow and polar bear skulls are direct evidence of the crimes that Vanessa Rundell committed, justifying her arrest. Evidence is imperative in any law case, as it is necessary information on determining if the accused is guilty or innocent of their charges. Now, not all cases have direct evidence, however, like in the United States v. Vanessa Rundell, but rather some cases have circumstantial evidence that imply a connection exists. To show the use of circumstantial evidence by lawyers in court, I constructed a fictional case called United States v. Joseph Miller, in which Joseph Miller is accused of the murder of 2 separate individuals. The 2 dead victims had no connection to one another except that they were both bird hunters. When their bodies were found, forensic scientists examined and concluded that they were stuffed in a taxidermy process. After these deaths, an extensive investigation occurred, and through this process, the police labeled Joseph Miller as a prime suspect to be put on trial. In terms of evidence, a mounted crow was found at Miller's house in a prominent spot on his shelf. On top of the evidence of the crow, it was found that he was previously charged with harassment during an animal protest. Neither of the evidence shows explicitly that Miller is the murderer, but it could be used to implicitly show that there is a relationship between this information and the deaths that proves that he is indeed the killer. On the defending side, Miller's lawyer is fighting for the evidence of the crow and the evidence of his previous crime not to be included in the trial. Their claim is that the taxidermy crow simply depicts the defense's interest and character and is therefore not valid to include. Miller's crow may simply be an expression of his interest of birds, an example of his personality. The possession of a taxidermy crow statue also does not necessarily show that Miller has the knowledge of how to do taxidermy. As was stated earlier, the federal rules of evidence is the method used to regulate evidence. One specific rule that Lawyer Maximum shared with the class was Rule 404B, which states that evidence of any other crime, wrong, or act is not admissible to prove a person's character in order to show that on a particular occasion the person acted in accordance with the character. Under this rule, Miller's prior harassment that is indicative of aggressive behavior is not significant enough to charge him with murder. A mistake in the past that exhibits negative traits does not prove that Miller would act in accordance with these traits in the current day. Ultimately, the defense argues that the evidence of the crow and previous crime is not strong enough to be used as evidence in the murder trial. On the other hand, the prosecution is fighting for the evidence of the crow and the evidence of Miller's previous infraction to be included in the trial. Firstly, the prosecution asks that the crow be included because it is evidence of taxidermy knowledge and a possible motive for the murders. After the police investigation, the mounted crow may be direct evidence that Miller is familiar with the taxidermy process and could have used this knowledge when stuffing the dead bodies of the 2 victims. The crow also shows Miller's passionate connection to birds and could be a motive in the killing of 2 bird hunters. While the defense case used Rule 404B in the federal rules of evidence as proof of why Miller's former infraction should not be included in the trial, the prosecution is utilizing this same rule to show that Miller's former infraction should be used in the trial. In the second part of this rule, it states that the previous crimes cannot be used as evidence to prove the character of a person, but may be admissible for another purpose, such as proving motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, absence of mistake, or lack of accident. With this rule, Miller's previous crime shows that he has a motive of violence when it comes to defending animals and is an indicator of his aggressive identity that is needed for someone to murder and stuff two bodies. With these assertions, the prosecution is confident that the evidence of the crow and the evidence of a prior crime is strong enough to be used as evidence in the murder trial. Whether this evidence is accepted or not is up to the judge, but in the case of lawyers, this is the kind of evidence that they use to prove their case. In conclusion, evidence is a tool for people to express a particular narrative effectively, depending on their methodology. In the case of law, the form of evidence that is used is mainly objective due to the fact that there is a strict criteria of what constitutes evidence. The justice system is an institution that furnishes law with evidence and is a vital establishment of what determines fair evidence in our society today. Thank you.
So if we could have our three panelists come up, as well as our professors, we have some time here for questions.
Okay, can I just say, I'm just so proud of you guys, this is so great. We made the class difficult in that, as I said, we didn't introduce, here's what evidence is. We made them sweat, and it was only like 4 or 5 weeks into the semester that they started being like, wait, and then started to come up with this understanding. I believe that they explained that well, but maybe there's some questions that can enable the students to clarify either their particular work or what we came to understand was the way to think about evidence.
I'll get started. So this is kind of a more subjective question on the spectrum. But when the crow appeared on the table in Humanities Hall, if you've been up to Humanities Hall, you know the table in the middle. My office looks right out at it. And I swear it stared at me for 2 minutes. And I was like, what is going on in this class? What are they doing? So what were your initial thoughts about having to use this as evidence? Because I initially was like, I think maybe the professors have lost it a little.
Somebody thought it was a lot. Go ahead, who wants to answer?
Well, first when I saw the crow, I thought it was a very interesting approach for it to be the final essay and presentation for our class. All three of us had a pretty objective lens on what evidence was. So looking at the crow as a lawyer perspective, I immediately thought the different types of evidence that are used and how a taxidermy crow could be used in certain ways. So first, I tried to find an actual case, which I surprisingly found. And then from there, I decided to make my own fictional case, which I know a lot of other people did in the more subjective lens when they made a story of what the crow stands for. But initially, I thought it was very interesting because at the very end, seeing all the presentations and how everyone saw the crow. Some people saw it as face value as I did, and some people saw it as a symbol. So it was very interesting to see how everyone described it.
You had a way easier time adjusting that than I did. I saw the crow, I remember when I walked in with that, I was just like, what is that and what's happening? But since they randomly assigned the topics that we had to base our presentations on, I didn't really know what to do for mine because I had business and marketing. And it was a little bit more of a struggle for me personally because I didn't know anything, I knew nothing about business or marketing. Until it was 3 a.m., 2 weeks before I had to do the project, and it was like, I can just sell it. I can sell the crow. And that is what became my project instead of trying to look at it for, metaphorical meaning.
Same way. I was very surprised when you brought the crow in. I was especially with those of them who were assigned, I was like, how am I supposed to do this? Especially because I think in my brain I was like, okay, trying to look for what exactly they would want for, and then they were it's supposed to be for us to look on. So we're not you're definitely with the answers for it. That's how you know what journalism, journalism covering news, covering something interesting. So I literally typed in crow and then typed in crow news. That's how I found my article about crows and crows. So yeah.
certainly assume that it helped a lot, but how much do you guys think having all those guest presenters who had all their different perspectives impact your view when you were finally able to do the project?
I guess because I'm more of like an audio learner, like I work the best with the audio and visuals. Because like when we read articles, some of them were more difficult to read than others. But hearing, I guess, the perspective of the different speakers and speakers they definitely do representation, they give like little stories of like working in the field. That really helped, I guess, in a picture of how people are supposed to approach the class. Yeah.
Having a lot of speakers gave me like more of a perspective of how to view like one specific thing. Because as we all talk about in our presentation, we all think about how we all originally thought that evidence is just like this one small thing. But we learned that it's way more than that instead of just being confined to this particular definition. And it also kept me on my toes, which I'm glad.
Yeah, I definitely think having a variety of speakers is very entertaining each class, since our class was 3 hours long. So every week coming in, having someone new and from a different perspective talk about certain types of evidence that is acceptable in their fields is very interesting. For me, having an actual lawyer come in and us having different types of articles where I got inspired by like my murder piece was by my professors sending us a reading about a particular case like that. So having kind of different perspectives on something so simple that a lot of people believe that they know was very interesting to be in that class and start to learn about that.
Hey guys, so when you're doing a research project, you're always bound to learning something new, right? But what about learning something about yourself? So is there something that you've learned about yourself, and is there something else other than the pro that you would like to take a point of perspective on in your respective
It kind of, this project really taught me to think more outside of what I already know, because as I said, I knew nothing about business or marketing, and it forced me to look at everything in a whole new perspective, which I do think is the point of the class. But, hold on, I lost my train of thought. Yeah.
What was that like for you? So like, what was it like to be challenged outside of your field?
What is it like? What is it like to be challenged outside your field? At first it's kind of scary, because then you have to Google everything, and you're like, I don't understand any of this. But it takes a little bit of time, it takes a lot of work, and then eventually you get it, and it clicks.
Well, with my particular field that I went into, I think we had an exercise in class where we had a subject and we were all debating like lawyers in that class. And in that specific class, after I went up and did my little spiel about whatever I was fighting for, people started turning to me like, Tori, maybe you should be a lawyer. Like you should go into that. So going into this project and kind of taking that perspective and even taking one single rule and being a good lawyer, you can change it to whichever narrative you can and debate whichever side depending on that one singular rule was just fascinating to learn. So maybe law is in my future, but first I have to pass the bar exam. But after that, we'll see.
I guess what I learned about myself while researching movies in the project. I guess because I don't know like which professor I talked to about, but like this class helped like, because I'm still like undeclared like at major wise. I'm also kind of learning what maybe my interest would be, what it is like, what I would like, what I would dislike. I guess like I probably wouldn't want to jump up with it because it's not that field for me, but it's still interesting to like learn about it and learn about the process of doing the research. I found that really fascinating. I guess it's like changing like how I view how the news and how the news like gets to us like as an audience.
I think it all taught us how to be way more creative, because we had another aspect of the project that we kind of wanted to bring to today, but we didn't think it would fit in our 15-minute time frame, which is conspiracy theories. And that's hard.
I know Susie wrote paper for us as a project. You want me to talk about my conspiracy theory? Or that's,
we have time.
I mean, that's it. Okay. You want to go first?
Could we talk about how, I guess conspiracy theories could be a form of evidence more on subjective side? Because it could basically be making something up, exaggerated or exaggerated based on no evidence, or like tweaking a little detail from whatever, I guess, source you're getting it from. So I guess for like my final paper, I did a crow from a journalist's perspective. The conspiracy theory was, I think, along the lines of the business owners were trying to close after they had somebody else disappear suddenly during mid-March of 2022. And it took like actual frustrations business owners have with, like, the close everywhere and turned into a theory that has some that stand out, even though it's most likely not happening.
Since my favorite is business, my theory was that crows were hoping to turn everybody to digital and like paperless transactions because they wanted coins to be not a thing anymore, so they could steal the coins and build their wealth. You know, crows are really into shiny things and really like, and coins are one example of that. But it's kind of interesting having research. I think I had to take more of a scientific perspective on my conspiracy theory because I had to understand why crows would want to do this, and as to research the stock market, which whole other thing.
Well, kind of going off of your murder mystery comment, my conspiracy theory was I knew I wanted to make it really out there since law is so objective. So for my reasoning behind why Joseph Miller is the killer of those individuals was that he was psychotic and had a psychotic break, and the crow was telling him to murder all those people to get back at them for murdering the crow. So that was kind of where my conspiracy theory went. I knew I wanted to be very far-fetched, but with a conspiracy theory, it's kind of like the mixing and bending of evidence. So with this idea that Joseph Miller is psychotic, well, there is evidence behind that where he is has the crow is on a prominent spot on his desk. The same exact process that the crow went through, he's putting through individuals. So it's basically the bending of evidence to kind of make this out of the ordinary argument. So I had really a lot of fun with that conspiracy theory.
It's very curious why you have this crow.
Yes. So we have a couple more.
I'm curious about so in this story, Joseph Miller killed 2 humans, or supposedly accused of this, and stopped them. There was 2 humans named Valence Archibald. I'm sensing some unconscious aggression.
Well, they were 2 psychology majors, so they're able to.
There we go. We'll ask a word about that. So I'm curious about the issue of probability when it comes to evidence, because like for something to count as legitimate evidence in the field, really, the probability of it being true matters a lot. Different based on the field. So my sense was that what counts as legitimate evidence in journalism would not be passed as far as what would count as legitimate evidence in a court of law. And then it would be still higher bar in like a phase 3 clinical trial for the development of a pharmaceutical, where like the probability that the results happen by chance needs to be like 1 in 10,000, something like that. And then if you go to Large Hadron Collider, particle accelerator, the chance that the evidence was just random chance is like 1 in 20 million or something like that. So if that was the bar for evidence in journalism or law, like no articles are going to get written by journalists, and no one would ever be found guilty. So I was wondering, can we quantify this, or are we doing this intuitively when we say this is regulation needs to pass in order to be considered legitimate evidence for the economy or for writing an article or tort law. I can also rephrase the question if it's too long.
What is kind of covering each of our things is how evidence has to undergo, like the methodology of some sort to be considered legitimate, or to be like more on the objective side of the spectrum. So usually it's subject to like a lot of other perspectives on top of the one that it is mainly in, or like, I think there's like articles have to be reviewed before they go to the newspaper, or like anything that goes into business has to be audited and checked at the end of every year before it can really be used to create like a, you know, premise based off of it. And lawyers have paralegals to help with this, or is that? Okay, we'll go with that. And yeah, we got that far first. But obviously the jury comes to a conclusion after hearing all of the evidence and debating whether or not this could be factual, this isn't factual, this is made up, or this can be biased. And if anybody else wants to add on. Oh, I got you guys. Sorry.
We had the phrase beyond reasonable doubt, just popped in my mind.
So I had an amazing slide for this, which was the spectrum and subjective on one side, objective on another. So maybe you could understand the probability question as what we talked about as the spectrum.
Yeah, I was kind of going to touch upon the spectrum of subjectivity and objectivity. So for me, law was kind of the most objective, where it's not just they lay out the cases and then argument and that's it. There's so detailed of like what evidence is accepted. So that one rule could be twisted either way, and they have to pass that one piece of evidence to finalize their whole entire case. But in one class where we had, I don't forget the speaker, I forgot the speaker's name, but it was for theater. And they came in and talked about the different aspects of what constitutes evidence in theater and how that is so subjective, where it can be a facial expression, where you can take it one way, but another person takes it another way. But at the end of the day, it's evidence of that particular emotion that they're trying to convey. So with that probability, it kind of goes more to objective and subjective depending on the methodology that one is taking. And I think it's important that we have that spectrum, because theater and law, their evidence is so completely different, but in each case it's unique and allows that field of study to flourish, which I think is very important for that.
So really at different levels of, it's really about managing uncertainty. I mean, because if somebody makes a very slight facial expression, nobody can know what's going on in that person's mind. What we're doing is we're making presumptions. If somebody like moved their eye a little bit, we have less certainty about what that means. If somebody breaks down and forms crying, we have much less uncertainty about what that means. So it seems like that's part of what we're trying to do here, is manage uncertainty. And in some areas, we allow for tons of uncertainty. Let's say whatever they want, but you can't do that in a journal or in court of law. So it's interesting how in our culture we have these different spheres where we're like allowing for different amounts of uncertainty. You can do this here, but you can't do this here. It's kind of good.
Can I answer that? And so the idea isn't just about managing uncertainty, right? You guys got this part. It's about what are the rules of it, which is why we have it divided into these different areas, is to try to figure out in each one of these areas, like you were saying, Victoria, right? We have different kinds of rules about that. And what does that mean? And so it's exploring, at least on this on a kind of basic level, what are the rules under journalism? What are the rules under the social sciences? What are the rules in the legal system, and so on? Which we could probably spend, at least a couple of semesters or more unpacking those, because they're very, very detailed in modern institutions, right? I mean, talking about the law, for example, and you were saying it could go either way. That's just for one of those rules, the 404B rule.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a sentence or two long, and you talked about how it could go, you could interpret it or understand it this way if you're the prosecution, or you could interpret it or understand it this way if you're the defense.
So just for everybody to make it super clear, one example is to say the most subjective objective thing would be, for instance, Edgar Allan Poe saying, I'll tell you what the bird is, right? And he writes it home, and it's just entirely subjective. However, a forensic scientist might come by and say, is Archibald's DNA on that bird? We're going to test it, and we're going to find out. And so the probability closest to objectivity for something like a chemical test, and closest to subjectivity for instance, a poem.
And on that note, let's thank his
No.
To the end, thank you to Valley Williams
Yes,
for
thank you.
this for us. And